and welcome everybody to my podcast about soul expansion and inspiration. My name is Ali O'Shea, and I would like to give a very warm welcome to my guest here, Richard Knight, to the show. Richard is a psychic medium who was born with amazing gifts, including telekinesis, levitation, extra strong intuition, mind reading, healing, and the ability to create fire in the palm of his hands. So welcome, Richard. Would you like to start telling us a little bit about each of these amazing gifts that you have?
Sure, Ali. Thank you for welcoming to the podcast. I appreciate it, and it's been a pleasure getting to know you. By the way,
Thank you.
You're just a very special spirit. Well, it all started basically at birth. You could say that some of us come in much more aware than the normal script that is normally written. Mine came in very enhanced, so therefore I was born with 14 senses instead of 5. So
Wow.
if you run down the 5, there is of course a clairsentience to each of the 5. You know, when you sense things, there's clairsentience, which means you can detect energy of beings in the room or in a house or in wherever you happen to be. It's a sensitivity that allows you to detect spirit's presence, and it also allows you to interpret the energy that is presented before you. When it comes to speaking, okay, and I forget what the Claire name for it is, but anyway, it allows you to actually channel or to actually reach out to spirit and have spirit speak through you. And so we call it mediumship, we call it channeling, this kind of thing. Anyway, it's clairaudience in that you're hearing speakers, the spirits speak to you, but you're also presenting it through your own vocal cords and so forth. So it's kind of like you're hearing it and it just flows through.
Yeah.
And then of course, we have hearing, which was clairaudience, of course. And then there's clairsentience, clairaudience, clairvoyance, which basically can come to people in many different streams. Sometimes you see pictures, and sometimes you see flashes of scenes. Other times you actually, it's like live spirit interview. In other words, it's like the spirit presents itself to you and they have a dialogue with you, and you see and perceive the entire spirit as they're speaking to you. And then of course they go back into the dimension from which they came. I mean, most people have this perception that the other side is a very long ways away from us. In actuality, it's only about 4 feet above us. And the reason we don't perceive it with our 5 senses is because it's at a higher vibration rate than what we experience in the 3-dimensional world.
Yeah.
So
how many was it? 1,000 feet? Sorry, it broke there a little bit on the video. How far away are they?
About 4 feet.
Oh,
So
okay.
basically, if you were to take your shoulder height and measure 4 feet from it, you would actually be reaching into the other side. But the frequency and vibration rate of the other side is much, much higher than ours.
Yes,
and that's
absolutely.
why we don't perceive it.
Absolutely.
So then, of course, intuition is a gift that we all have. The funny thing is, all of these gifts that I have come incarnate with are basically there for any and everyone to use. It's our natural divine gifts that we inherited as children of the light or children of God, children of source, whatever your belief happens to be. There is nothing that is wrong. It is all right. It is just a matter of perception. Because we each transit through many, our life's journey. And, I can't tell you how many thousands of times I've been here. I only know that it's been thousands. Okay. And fortunately for me, a great many of those paths have all come full circle, which means that basically the mind, which is probably the greatest computer ever invented, has a tremendous amount of storehouse area for wisdom and knowledge, and also video clips of experience. And so, I mean, people go through and they'll walk into a place and all of a sudden they sense a deja vu. In other words, it's like, wait a minute, I've been here before. And the fact of the matter is, yes, you've been there before, but chances are the scene isn't the scene that you're actually seeing before you. It may have been 3, 4, 10 lifetimes ago, but the energy remains the same because the energy that you left there is recognized by you, and that's why it feels familiar.
Amazing.
So anyway, yeah, it is, The ability to levitate is nothing more than, again, shifting your auric energy, which we're all surrounded by an aura, which is an energetic field, and this energetic field is supported by our chakras, which are the 12 chakras that we have leading from the root. And then, of course, you have 4 chakras, 1 in each palm, 1 in each foot. And in addition, it builds up until what you call the high center chakra, which is about 3 feet above you. And all of these 12 chakras in alignment. And as long as they're flowing perfectly, then you are in flow with the love of source. And that divine energy, in turn, allows you to defy what would regularly be considered science or man's law, because you're no longer held to those laws.
Right.
So,
And so can you levitate? Can you levitate?
I haven't done it in quite some time, because naturally,
the chakras have to be in balance. Is that correct?
yes, and basically I have to be a pinpoint focus mentally, spiritually, and emotionally at the time to say, okay, I am light, 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 and basically as I become lighter, gravity no longer has a hold on me.
Yeah.
And the same thing is done with telekinesis. You could say is actually a projection of that ability, because now you're taking an object and you're surrounding it with your energy, and you're actually telling that object that it's no longer controlled by gravity either, and so it floats into the air.
Okay, I was going to ask you to explain to our listeners who might not know what telekinesis is. It's when you can move an object basically with the power of your mind, isn't it?
Right, yeah. So you could say in a short speech, you would say mind over matter, because that's exactly what it is. It's the energy of your mind reaching out to that object.
A little bit like Uri Gallagher or whatever his name is, bending.
Oh, yeah. I once actually saw him in person once in New York. When he actually bends the spoons, they actually happen. I mean, he was only 3 feet away from me when he actually did this. And again, that's the power of his mind influencing the physical structure of that spoon. And his will is telling the spoon to bend, and it does.
It's amazing, isn't it? Absolutely fascinating.
Oh, it is. Yes.
Fascinating subject. It really is. Yeah.
But again, it points out that we are only limited to the degree in which we apply limits to ourselves.
Exactly. We are limitless beings. It's just if we're getting in our own way with resistance and all different kinds of things that we're blocking ourselves, isn't it?
Right. Sure.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you for explaining all of that. So going back a little bit, you went to a Catholic school, and you tell me that you were classed as the devil's son, in inverted commas. So tell us a little bit about how, if it did hinder your life with the gifts that you have now, that you have to offer people, or if in fact it did hinder you.
Well, I also have to put a wee bit of a spin on that as well.
Okay.
Because about all the time that this was happening, there was a whole lot going on, some of which I instinctually understood, and then other parts I didn't have any understanding of at all. Because you have to understand, I entered this school when I was only 5 years old.
Yeah.
So therefore, to the nuns and the priests, when you start talking about a child that is floating in midair and is making his stuffed animals go in circles in the air around him in the room, and
is that what you were doing?
Yes, and if he so chooses, he can make his own bed float while he's laying in it, and when made angry, he can actually make flames appear in the palm of his hand, to the extent that it's not damaging or harming his hand any, nor is it damaging any of the environment, because it's not a regular flame. It's an etheric flame. It's blue in color, and therefore it doesn't affect anything physically unless a direct will is applied to it. And so, this is back in the 60s. So we're back in the day when, spirituality is acknowledged and is embraced and understood, because you have the hippie children and you have the low children and all this going on. But at the same time, Catholicism was basically like a road that said, okay, this is what you believe, this is what you are allowed to understand, and this is the path that you must follow. And I mean, it starts with First Holy Communion, where basically as an individual, you're forgiven all the sins which in actuality doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because I mean, as we come in, we are perfectly innocent. We are born of the blood of purity. So therefore, you don't actually have any sins against you, unless it were to be in the far past. But even then, there would be grace that would allow you to be sequestered from that, you could say.
Right.
So about this time, I also became a savant of language. So suddenly here this 5-year-old who had basically been taught
I'm
Gaelic.
just going to stop you there and just explain to the listeners, please, if you would, what a savant means.
Okay, a savant is a mentally gifted individual who has an expertise in one given talent or one given field. For example, a musical savant would be someone that could only be maybe 4 or 5, and all of a sudden they can play the piano and they play perfectly wonderful concertos, which they have no way of having been trained that long to be able to play that well. That's
Perfect.
a musical savant. And then, of course, you've got kids that know math backwards, forwards, and sideways, and can do all kinds of mathematical formulae, which again they would have no possible understanding of. Yet they carried it out as though they were a computer. You know what I'm saying?
So it's almost like another word for kind of a genius in a particular field. Right.
Right. It is. It is.
Yeah. So
Whereas when
sorry
you
for
mention,
interrupting you, but just in case
oh,
people
no, it's
know,
good to have clarity. You know what I'm saying? Because naturally, I relate to all this naturally. But
yes,
another person listening to me, like you said, they're going to have questions and say, well, wait a minute now, what exactly does that mean? So
yes,
yeah, it allows the opportunity to answer those questions, you know?
sure.
So anyway, my gift was in language. And so in addition to speaking Gaelic and English, I also spoke German, French, Italian, Hebrew, Greek, and Latin.
Wow.
And there was a very specific reason for this because, as you might imagine, having displaying gifts of this nature to a population that is completely unaccepting thereof, all right, there is a tremendous amount of rejection. And with rejection comes isolation, because when they fear something, a person normally reacts by saying, okay, either they want to kill it, okay, which unfortunately is the most extreme reaction, or at the very least, let's isolate it so we're only affected by it when we interject ourselves into their environment. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it just so happened there was a library upstairs in one of the buildings, and this library contained tens of thousands of books. And the books were written in all kinds of different languages. So since my perception of the reality that I was being presented with was saying, well, this is all rejection, you don't fit in, you don't belong here, I could go up to the library and sit for hours and read all these different books. And these books, were lively tales about all kinds of different parts of the world, all kinds of different adventures, all kinds of things of that nature. And of course, again, they're saying, well, wait a minute now, how is it he can read this? How is it he can be knowledgeable of these languages? And that was kind of the one rock that was kind of my foundation and my sounding stone, because they said, well, if he can speak all these languages, then that must be a gift of the Spirit. Because even Christ said that, hello, I shall bless you with the knowledge of spirit. And when I do so, you shall communicate in whatever language Spirit directs you to. So therefore, that was kind of a blessing in relation to all these other gifts that they just did not want to understand. It's not that they couldn't understand, it's that they chose not to understand. And that, again, choices is what regulate our reality.
Sure. And do you still speak these languages today?
Well, I have them on file. I did catch myself in one instance where I was overhearing a German conversation between three native Germans, and it was in a bar setting, and they were having drinks, and I was having a drink, and I walked up and I proposed a toast to them in German, and the four of us then in turn dialected in German, and up until that point in my life, I had never ever read a German book or had any German training in class-wise or anything else, and I was very fluent with it. Um, I do, and I'm not sure exactly how to put this into words. I guess you could say it's like your higher self is saying things to you, but it comes out in a completely different language. And of course, a lot of people are finding that they have this gift, and sometimes they say it's angelic language, sometimes they say it's the language of light, and all of this kind of things. And there are times where I just, rattle off this language, and there's part of me that understands what I'm saying, but my conscious self is just saying, okay, because it doesn't know how to react. You see what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Right. Okay. That's very interesting. And do you feel then that them sort of you becoming isolated because of your gifts, do you feel that as you grew up having these gifts, that you felt maybe ashamed because that's the way that those people made you feel when you were younger? And did you sweep some of these gifts under the carpet maybe for a while?
Yes, yes, definitely. Over time, I began to suppress them to a large extent. I mean, my intuition, the ability to read minds, the ability to see things in advance, and things of that nature, I kept on tap at all times because I figured that that was a guarantee of my own internal survival.
Right.
But as far as creating fire, no, that completely went under wraps. Uh,
Really?
well, there was one instance where I was at a concert where someone actually did try to physically burn me with regular fire, but then I was very outrageously dressed, and they thought for sure that I must be the devil, so therefore they figured, well, fire is the devil's only son, or the only friend of the devil, so therefore they came to me with a lit piece of wood and they intended to burn me. And fortunately for me, again, because of protection of spirit, I reached out to the flaming piece of wood, and I was not harmed by the flame. Rather, the flame went down the wood and caught the person's clothes on fire. So they said, okay, well, we need to leave him alone
Yeah.
because he's really way out there. You know?
Oh my goodness. It's funny what people think and do, but I know that in the past, that it wasn't accepted, and of course people were thought of as witches. And I know that there's loads of modern day witches now, but they were all obviously, as we know, burned at the stake or drowned or whatever because of gifts that they had. And
Actually, if I may interject,
sure.
okay, because I've done a lot of research in this area. Plus, I have a family tradition that goes back over 5,000 years as both druids and witches per se.
Yeah.
There were very, very, very few actual gifted witches that were burned at the stake. Rather, that was a situation where a lot of scared people persecuted a lot of innocent people
Mm.
on the accusation that they were witches, or their fear was that maybe they harmed someone or maybe they influenced a situation, you see what I'm saying, in a negative way. Now, of course, scientifically, they found out that it was a rye infestation of the rice that actually made them hallucinate. And so these people who were hallucinating, the regular people couldn't identify with them, why they were acting this peculiar, so they thought they were possessed. So therefore, because they were possessed, they must be children of the devil. And
Okay.
again, the church's perception was that, hello, if you have concourse with the devil, then naturally you do things that are very extraordinary. And of course, in a situation where you're talking 16, 1700s, so you're talking 300 or 400 years ago, people were very much susceptible to fear, and
Mm.
therefore anything they could not understand, they reacted with fear, and therefore naturally, again, that's the extreme. If you don't know something, but you're a larger body of people in comparison to maybe only one or two individuals, it is easy to say, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and eliminate you because now you pose a threat to the larger community.
Very sad, isn't it? Very
It
sad.
is. It is.
But it is what it was. I mean, it's in the past now.
Oh
And
yeah, exactly.
um, so Richard, you at the age of 14, you told me that you died after an incident, which you can tell us about if you wish. But you died and you came back. And would you mind talking to us a little bit about this incredible experience? Because
Sure.
it must be an incredible experience to have gone through that. I mean, I've read a lot of near-death experience books and, all of that.
Sure.
And it is a very fascinating subject.
Well, I came home from high school one afternoon to my parents' house, and I had changed into swimming trunks, believing that I was going to go down the street to a community pool and go swimming. And I came down the hallway to my mom, and I told her what I was going to do. And all of a sudden, my body was completely paralyzed with pain. And I fell to the floor, and basically all of my muscles contracted, and I was in a fetal position. The same position that a baby is as they're basically growing inside the womb and so forth.
Mhm.
And I could not move. All of my muscles were constricted. So they called an ambulance, and the ambulance came, and they put me on the gurney, you know, and they took me in the ambulance and drove me to the hospital. When I arrived at the hospital, of course, they pulled me into the emergency room, and they gave me lots and lots and lots of shots of tranquilizer so that my muscles in turn would relax. Now,
Right.
of course, the doctor's impression was that I had appendicitis, which you have an appendix, which is a very, very small organ that's down in, off to the side of the intestines and so forth. And the whole purpose of that organ is to take out the extreme poisons from your body and prevent the body from having to deal with those extreme poisons. And of course, it gathers those poisons so seldom that that's why medically they say, well, you can live without it, you don't really need it. So anyway, they thought for sure I had appendicitis, and I was rushed into the operating room, okay? And they had me all stretched out, and the doctor went ahead and he took a scalpel and sliced me open. Now understand that I am watching all of this go on above what is going on. So in other words, I'm watching myself laid out on the operating table, and I'm watching the doctor cut me, and I'm watching the nurses have conversation and handing him the instruments and all of this kind of thing, as though I'm looking like at a movie that's going on beneath me. And of course, I was heavily sedated. You see what I'm saying? My physical self had no conscious knowledge of knowing what was going on. It was rather my spirit overwatching myself physically. So the doctor cuts, and he goes in and he finds that the appendix is perfectly healthy. Now he's totally dumbfounded because he has no understanding what is causing my current physical condition. So he takes out the appendix just for the heck of it, since he was already in there, and he makes a couple more larger incisions, opening the area of which he has perspective, because he's looking for some other explanation. Is there something else going on that's wrong, that's
Right.
majorly affecting things? And at first he couldn't find anything. So then he decides, well, okay, since I can't find anything, we'll just say that it was appendicitis and let it go with that. So he starts to suture back together the uppermost cut that was made into my physical self, and a ganglion growth, green in color, wrapped around his pinky finger. Okay, and now he's really tripping out because he's saying, wait a minute, what is this coming from? And so he makes the opening a bit bigger and a bit bigger, and he come to find out there was a growth about the size of like an apricot, but it was solid green in color. And off of this apricot, there were 5 tentacles, the one of which the shortest of which had wrapped around his pinky finger, and the other 4 were going to up into the body. And naturally, about this time, my body goes into severe shock because I've been open for too long. And not only that, but he's starting to mess with these tentacles per se, and as he loosens them, it's creating physical change inside my physical self, and the body goes into shock. And basically, I'm no longer kind of floating over the body. The next thing I know, I'm going up in the air and going through the hospital roof and into the night sky. And I can't tell you how much distance I traveled or how much time it took, because naturally, when you're in spirit form, you have no perception of time. So I flew across the night sky into the tunnel, okay? And it was multicolored. And as soon as I got to the entranceway of the tunnel, it was like magnetic. In other words, I felt propelled down this tunnel that had multicolored lights streaming all throughout it and everything. And I traveled to the end of this tunnel, and I was greeted by what I perceived to be angelic beings, okay? They were light beings, and they had wings, and they were all white in color and carrying on. And I'm looking at them and I'm saying, whoa, why am I here? You know, I have no understanding why I'm there. And they said, oh, well, you'll learn. And one waved his arm, and a gigantic cobblestone veranda opened before me, okay? And at the far end of this cobblestone veranda was a large redwood chair, almost like a king's throne. The difference being this chair was alive. It had rosebuds wrapped around it, rose vines wrapped around it, and the roses were opening and closing, opening and closing. And then off to the right, my perception at that time of what I believed God would appear as, you could say, a very large robed figure appeared out of nowhere. The only difference being that where the face, the hands, and the feet were supposed to be was nothing but golden energy. And this being come round and he sat in the chair. And as he sat in the chair, a very wise face with a very long white beard appeared. And in the place where energy was, hands appeared and the feet appeared and so forth. And the next thing I knew, I was being propelled to stand in front of this, what I perceived to be God. Okay.
Right.
And I got to right in front of him, and he lifted up his left hand, and a large book appeared out of nowhere. And he brings the book down, and he sits the book in his lap, and he opens the book. And I'm, standing right in front of him, looking at this book. And as he turns the pages of the book is displaying people's lives from the moment they were born all the way up to the present. And so he flips through the pages, and he gets to my page, and basically it's showing the whole of my life and everything that's gone up with me, up until that point. And he looks at me and he says, well, I am sorry, but there are many things you have yet to do that you have committed to, that you have promised to. And because of that, you will not be allowed to go home this day. And of course, you have to understand that I felt such love and such calm and such peace. It's very hard to describe in words. And so naturally, my reaction was, no, I don't want to leave. Why should I have to leave? And he's saying, well, it is not your time yet, and you must go back. And so basically he closes the book and he puts up a hand. And as he puts up the hand, the palm of the hand is facing towards me, and I'm projected back to the opening of the tunnel. And just as he's starting to rise from the chair, I ask for a favor. And he says, well, whatever favor you wish, I will gladly grant you. And I said, I would love to be able to see myself as who and what I really am. And he said, well, that's not a problem. So I'm standing at the opening of the tunnel, and all of a sudden I come out of my body, which how spirit becomes out of spirit, I don't know, other than maybe a part of your spiritual consciousness shifts so that you can look back on yourself or what you perceive to be yourself. Right. And so I looked back, and all I was a swirling orb of golden light. And that was all that I was. So with that, naturally, I was instantaneously propelled back down the tunnel, went through the night sky, back through the hospital roof, and back towards my body, which at this time was laying on a gurney covered by a sheet. And there was a nurse at the end of the body in front of my feet, and she was putting a toe tag on my big toe that announced when I had died and who I was and so on and so forth. Well, she's putting the tag on my toe, and I sit up. Well, she screams, hollers, and faints. Fortunately for me, there was another nurse in the room, and she come over and pushed me back down on the gurney because my insides were starting to come out simply because the doctor had never closed me. So, yeah. So anyway,
absolutely fascinating story. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I know, to our listeners who might be sitting there thinking, there's so many different perceptions, and I think there are our own perceptions, and everybody needs to know that everybody's experience is their experience. If they've had a near-death experience, or I know that a lot of near-death experiences are people who've actually died and come back, just like your story. Right. So people need to know that too. But so yours would be classed as a near-death experience, really. But everybody has their own experience of what happened to them when they got there and all of that. So thank you for sharing your story with us. It's very interesting. And when you say that you came out of your spiritual body and you look back at your spiritual body as such,
right?
For me, when you said what you could see was the golden energy, I mean, it is just of pure love, and it's all about energy, isn't it? And we are energy beings. So what was your perception of yourself when you looked back and you saw that golden energy? Was it something like what I just said, or was it something totally different?
Yeah, it was very similar to what you just said, because it was like an understanding dawned on me suddenly that, hello, this is who and what I truly am, and not what I physically perceive myself to be.
Yeah, so which is a physical person, really.
Right. So, I mean, I felt immortal. I felt connected to God or Source in such ways that it's beyond words to a large extent, because it's like you suddenly recognize that, hello, This is the real you, and it is your spirit that is controlling the body in which you find yourself, through which you're having a human experience. And
Exactly.
that perspective, once it is truly seated within you, cannot be changed. It cannot be altered. It is like a truth that lives and breathes through you in all that you do.
Yes.
So it's like you've been shown, you've been taken out of the illusion and shown the dream, in a manner of speaking. Because the real dream is the fact that, yes, we are all spiritual beings, we're all immortal, and we have always and always shall be connected to source. There is no separation, there is no disruption, there is no independence per se. Our only independence is our humanity.
Yes,
You know what I'm saying?
exactly. We are all extensions of source energy. We are extensions of source energy, and we're
Right.
all connected. We're all one, and it's about understanding that, and that we are energetic beings first and foremost. So very interesting. And I know that I forgot to say on an interview I did earlier, but if anybody did want to leave comments and messages for Richard on the YouTube channel below, you can do so. And then, of course, we will get into later where to contact Richard if you would like to contact him. He's got many services that he can provide, but we will talk about that at the very end. But you said that you would like other people to know that we're immortal and that in reality there's no death. So we've already just spoken about that, but um, you know, life is just absolutely fascinating, and to you it must be extra fascinating after having gone through what you went through. I mean, to go through having all of those gifts, to being isolated, to having all those languages that you were able to speak and understand. What did your parents think about all of these things?
That's the funny thing. There was almost no connection. Okay. And this is the way that I corroborated, you could say, on a physical level, that what had happened to me was real. The hospital never told my parents that I died. Okay.
Wow,
The
I'm glad
following the
you mentioned that to me.
Yeah, the following day, I insisted on seeing the growth they had taken out of me, much to their dismay, because they couldn't understand how I knew about it. And the following week, I knew every aspect, trial, tribulation, journey that I would take in life. But at the end of that week, that knowledge was removed, because otherwise, what would be the point of being alive? You see what I'm saying? If you foresee everything that you're about to do before you do it, then it's like you already have a cheater's view of the
Yeah,
lessons you have to undertake.
your free
So,
will has been taken away because you're already perceiving that you have to do them. And we all have
right,
free will.
exactly. And that is the highest universal law that there is, because even our guides, our helpers, the angels and ascended masters, all of these beings of light cannot assist us unless we actually give them permission to do so,
Right.
simply because of that free will. So anyway, a couple months went by after, I'd gone through the hospital and returned home and all that good stuff. And I asked my stepdad, well, what kind of bills came from the hospital and all this? And he said, bills, what you mean? I said, well, surely your insurance must have been charged, for the hospital stay and the anesthesiast and the surgery and all this kind of thing. And he said, no, the only bill that I ever got was the ambulance ride. And I'm saying, wow, that's really weird. Well, it turns out the surgeon who actually conducted my surgery was a German by nationality. And he actually had a local practice with his own office and everything else. And it was probably maybe 3/4 of a mile away from my house, just by maybe coincidence. And then again, in reality, there is no coincidence.
Hmm.
Everything is synchronistic. In other words, again, going back to the understanding that everything and everyone is constantly tied together as one big family.
Hmm.
So I rode my 10-speed because I love to ride 10 speeds in my teens. And I went to where his office was, and there was a sign in the. Do I now? Oh,
What's
a
10?
10-speed. A 10-speed is a bicycle.
Oh, okay.
It's a racing bike. That's why
Oh,
it has 10 speeds. In other words, you can get a regular bicycle has no speeds. It just has one speed. You pump it and you go. A 10-speed is designed for racing. So it has 10 different gears on it that increase and lower the amount of push you have to give to the pedal.
Okay, sorry.
That's what tends.
Never
That's
heard.
okay. That's okay. Yeah, I mean, again, like I said, I'm going to use terms that are familiar with me, but it may not be familiar to you, or our listeners for that matter. But
Yeah.
anyway, so I rode my bicycle to where this doctor's office was, and there was a sign in the window, and he said, "Please see Dr. So-and-so. I have ended my practice, and I have gone back to Germany."
Oh,
So, taking all this into consideration, I'm saying, well, evidently there were no charges ever because they were afraid of malpractice. Because if in fact I had died, and then all of a sudden I was resurrected, which of course is a process they could not understand. Um, so, there rather than rather than trying to victimize the family of the child that had had this very bizarre experience, they just kind of washed it all under the table and said, okay, well, we just won't bill them for anything. We'll just write it off. And that was kind of a physical mental confirmation to me that what I had experienced was real. In other words, it wasn't just a psychological projection or my imagination or anything of that nature. It actually had physical substance.
yes, yes. But growing up, did your parents know about your gifts that you had?
I was caught once or twice in my bedroom levitating about 2 feet above the bed, and my mom just kind of shook her head and closed the door and said, "No, I'm not dealing with this."
But did
um,
your school not get in touch with your parents when they thought that you were like acting strange and, having fire in the palm of your hands and levitating in school and things like that?
no, because fortunately for me, my great grandmother came on campus and she took me out of the school during the weekends to her residence. And that's where she taught me how to control the abilities that I had, to know to work with them in different ways and so forth. And so she was kind of like, you could say, the dampening agent between what was actually physically, mentally, and emotionally going on with me and the rest of the family. Because I never got any visits from my mom or my stepdad or my grandparents or anybody else in the family. They never came to visit me at the school. And then, in addition, I graduated from that school when I was 7. In other words, a couple of years
Sorry,
later.
was it a boarding school? Like,
Yes, it was a boarding. Yeah, it was a boarding school. Uh-huh. So basically, I lived in a dormitory and attended classes on campus and all this kind of thing.
okay.
But no, there was complete not alienation, because my mother and I were very intuitively connected. In other words, when something was going on wrong with my mom, I would instantly know it, and vice versa was also true. But other than that, as far as true emotional connectedness, and I mean, of course, the love was there naturally. I mean, a child to the parent is always there, and so that love bomb was there. But in regards to normal emotional connectedness, no, it was kind of like just void. I don't know how else to describe it in words.
But your
Um,
grandmother that took you out at the weekend, then did she have gifts too? If she was showing you how
yes,
to, okay.
yes,
So
she
there were
too was she too was very, very gifted. In comparison to me, she probably had about 8 or 9 gifts more than me.
wow, that's amazing.
And but she was also 100 years old. So, and she didn't look 100, I assure you. She looked like she was 60 something.
Wow, that's
But
amazing.
again, you see that falls into the situation that, the more energy of your spirit that you have within your physical confines, the more younger you're going to appear, because the energy of your spirit transmutes and transforms and renews and regenerates all the cells of your body.
Yes,
So you just it's strange. I mean, it's kind of like an energetic elixir of life, you could say, or
yeah,
like the fountain of youth, in a manner of speaking.
that's
Because once you get to a certain point of realization, you stop aging, basically speaking. Or if you have reached a certain age, you begin to regain the youth you once had.
yeah.
But yeah, as far as the family was concerned, no, that there wasn't a great deal of interaction or anything of that nature. And I left home when I was 17, and I went into business for myself when I was 19, after doing a 1.5 year internship with a private investigating firm, one of the best in California. And thereafter, I went and I did all kinds of cases. Of course, there's confidentiality, so I can't name the actual clients. But in general, let's just say that I collected a lot of young people that had basically scattered all over the states, that had gotten involved in cults, gotten involved in drugs and everything else, and a lot of very famous individuals that were very wealthy paid me a good deal of money to go and locate their children and bring them back. And so that's what I did at first. And then, of course, as time went by, I became a military police officer for a short period of time. I also was with the Army Reserve and the JAG Corps, which is the Judge Advocate General's Corps. That's the ones that make the rules and the laws for the military.
Right.
That's what that is. And then I've also, so I just began civil and criminal investigations on my own. I was freelance. I was sole proprietor. I had studied the martial arts for, in total, over my entire life, a period of 30 years. I never, ever spent a dime on my training, simply because every time I was ready to learn something new, the teacher would appear out of nowhere and teach me what I needed to know. But I have basically helped people in all kinds of different ways the majority of my life. So my clair abilities, other than, like I said, my intuition, became very empathic in nature. So when someone would come and confide with me and needed counseling, like, for example, if they had run away or they were on drugs or whatever the situation might be, spiritually, I became very attuned to them and could counsel them as to what they needed to do in order to get themselves out of that situation.
Brilliant.
And you compromise. In other words, they're suppressed. They go underground, but at the same time, they're also there in an instance where they're vitally needed, And I mean, paranormal, I mean, I've written a book, and I hope to publish it in the none too distant future, called The Seeker. And it basically tells of all kinds of supernatural encounters that I've had, and just all kinds of strange
Definitely
psychic
publish that. You know that I'm writing a couple of books at the moment.
Yes.
Definitely. You should
So,
definitely. Well, fantastic. And so you do psychic readings for people, or what other ways can you help others? I know you've just touched there on paranormal. I know you do paranormal investigations. I know you're a healer. You talked about counseling and crisis intervention, etc. So if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, one of my listeners, for reading or to help with some paranormal activity or for a healing or any of the other services that you offer, Richard, how can they get in touch with you?
well, the two easiest means, of course, the first and foremost would be by phone. I am available 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 7 days a week, and I am on Eastern time. Um, and of course, I guess we'll print out that information, because otherwise, if I stay it now, people would have to be, what I'm saying. For the listeners, my phone number is 229-474-0923. And like I said, I live in the South, and I am on Eastern time.
Great.
And of course, that's United States.
Another way that they can get in touch with you without it being so intrusive, perhaps.
Well, I have a Facebook page. I have a profile on Facebook. I can be contacted on Messenger through Facebook.
Right.
I also have a profile on LinkedIn, a professional profile. And again, I can be contacted directly through Message on LinkedIn.
Yes, and I'd just like to clarify for people that your surname is Knight, K-N-I-G-H-T, Richard Knight.
That's correct. Like the guy that rides the horse. My armor now is titanium, because the old metal stuff used to rust, so we had to do away with that.
You do psychic readings and things like that, don't you?
Yes. I give psychic impression readings, which basically is where I'm doing nothing more than looking at the person and then in turn reading their energy. And then also I open myself to spirit, and spirit gives me insight as well as my own energetic perceptions. And sometimes I channel to the person if that's what's needed. Sometimes I do a reading just from what I myself as a spiritual entity am getting. In other words, it's like, okay, you need to tell them this, and this is going on, and this is what they need to do in order to handle or get out of that situation or whatever it may be. I also do tarot readings. I've been reading the tarot since I was 12, so that's over 50 years experience in the tarot. And I also do I Ching, although I haven't used that in quite some time.
Sorry,
but basically, yeah.
What's that?
The I Ching is the book of change. It's a Chinese system where you basically use a dozen staves or sticks that have been marked in certain ways, and when they fall into what they call hexagrams and things of that nature. And the book itself describes in passages what the various formulations, what the forms mean themselves. But like I said, I haven't used that in years. So no, basically speaking, yes, psychic readings, I do channeling, I am a medium, and I do tarot, and of course, yes, I practice 5 different disciplines of Reiki. I use both the Usai, which is a Chinese school, and the Tibetan school. I also practice angelic Reiki, ascended master Reiki, and a Enochian school Reiki, which is a very little known one. And I have a very serious advantage being that I used to be a healer in Atlantis. So all of that knowledge has come forward now. And eventually someday, hopefully in not too far distant future, I intend to create a healing center. And that healing center will utilize all 7 modes of healing. And the intention is, of course, that a person comes into the center and basically they're allowed to sit down at about 160 degrees very comfortably, and they are exposed to music, they're exposed to sound, so they're exposed to sound waves, light waves, frequency, vibration, crystal emissions, and basically direct energy from source. And these light chambers, which is what I've just described more or less, are already in existence, but again, they're at such a high frequency, they're not physically here on the earth. And so basically I hope to gain the permission in order to get bring one into physical reality. And again, that's a long range goal and a long range project, and
yeah,
who knows?
fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Well, Richard, I think that pretty much wraps it up, unless you've got anything else you'd like to add for the listeners, anything at all that you would like to add?
Well, yeah, another way to contact me is by email, of course. I can be reached at my initials, Richard Thomas, RT, and my last name, Knight, 35@gmail. And yes, I do readings through Hangouts, which basically is sort of like Zoom, but only on a very shortwave thing in regards to, and I have a Zoom room itself, which again is like Skype. And I prefer to do readings at least at a minimum with a picture, okay? And yes, of course, the more personal and the more upfront interaction with the person, the stronger the reading is going to be.
Yes.
But it takes at least a picture, okay? Yes, I can, and as far as the healing is concerned, I do healing both in person, which is very rare. The majority of the time, I reach out and do healings all over the world. And I mean, I've got clients that were healed in Australia. I've got clients that were healed in New Zealand, London, the Ukraine, because Reiki is basically source light energy. So in other words, again, this is entering into God's domain and saying, okay, well, all right, this individual needs to have a healing. And the interesting thing about Reiki is it is given to that person first off by permission. In other words, I have to have your permission or else I cannot interact with you.
I practice Reiki
second,
too. I'm a Reiki teacher, not a Reiki teacher, I'm a Reiki practitioner, sorry.
There you go. That's okay, because I mean, the name is master teacher anyway. Why they stuck that in there, I don't know, but anyway, who knows? Anyway, so yeah, it's universal life force energy, and basically when the person is at the most relaxed state and best state to receive it, then in turn they receive it.
Yes, and the more open they are to receive it, the better.
Exactly, yeah. And again, that falls back to the perspective that everything happens at its own time in its own way, that there is a timing to the universe and creation that even though we may not understand it, and
Divine
oftentimes
timing.
Frustrating. Yeah, it's frustrating now. I mean, to tell you, sometimes.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about divine timing. Divine timing has been a theme throughout my life, and of course it is throughout other people's, but they don't realize it. And sometimes we think we're ready for things before we actually are. Our ego thinks we're ready for things before we actually are. And if you were to think of, oh, I want a unicorn pooping in my sitting room, and then all of a sudden it manifested. That example,
What an example you pull there, girl. I mean, come on, a unicorn pooping in your cereal.
Have you never seen me dressed up as a unicorn? I'm a bit of a fun girl.
Oh, okay then.
Yeah. So, you know, everything in divine timing, you know, I'm a firm believer in that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Very much agreed. You know,
Well,
because like you say, our perception and, well, our true perception, which is our highest, most self, which would be our spirit. And then, of course, and, you know, sometimes I wonder about the spirit and the soul, because I don't know, the soul gets interjected where the spirit should be, and the spirit gets interjected where the soul should be. And my understanding is that the spirit is our energetic selves in the finest, purest form that we are. And our soul basically is our personality that overlays our spirit. And so basically, as a human being, you could say, I guess our human personality identifies with our soul, which is our higher self's
funny
personality.
because I would sort of interject the two of them together as well. And, you know, I was going to call this spiritual tales or whatever, but I ended up calling it soul expansion and inspiration because that's my website name. And I believe that we're all here to grow and to expand, as well as for the joy of the journey and the co-creating and all the good stuff. But, you know, I think a lot of people do that. And, you know, it's okay to do it, really, isn't it? You know, to our spirit and
Oh,
ourselves,
sure,
you
sure,
know.
sure. Again, it's a matter of perception and understanding.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, well, thank you so much for being here, Richard. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on and sharing your story, your fascinating story with us. And, you know, if anybody would like to get in touch with Richard, you know, the links will be put below the YouTube video, and, you know, you can contact him on Facebook and LinkedIn and all those Facebook. Yeah, I did say Facebook, Messenger, all those good places that he said. So thank you so much for being here with me today, Richard. Thank you for taking the time and being with us.
Thank you,
Have a
Ali.
good day.
Namaste.
Namaste.